to World History with Mr. Gaspar. I am Mr. Gaspar. You are you, or at least you should be, because if not, that would be weird. Today we're going to be talking about the Enlightenment, and I hope that you find it to be very enlightening. That's a super dad joke right there. That's why they pay Mr. Gaspar the big bucks, $3 an hour. Study hard, kids. It could be you. Let's jump right into it. We're looking down here at our slide, and got a picture. It says right up here, the Enlightenment, and basically we're talking about Europe from the 1600s to the 1700s. Surprise, surprise, even though this is a world history class, Edgenuity likes to talk about Europe. In fact, 90% of the content that we're focusing on takes place in Europe. It's more of a European history class, to be quite honest about it. Anyway, we see right here, we've got a picture we'll talk about later of a salon. You got some people there, they're discussing stuff. No, it's not a convention for retired and elderly pimps. These are philosophers talking about all kinds of deep intellectual sorts of things. That's what the Enlightenment is. It's a philosophy. It's a way of thinking about the world, a way of thinking deep thoughts about your unemployment. No, it's a new way of thinking about the world that applies sort of the things that maybe scientists were doing with the scientific revolution that we talked about, and they're applying it to like government politics and things like that. So that's what we're going to be discussing. Okay. So let's talk about the spread of the Enlightenment. Mr. Gaspar likes to spread peanut butter on his toast. And here we have, in this picture right here, it's basically looking at some of the hot spots of the Enlightenment, as well as zeroing in on some famous people in the Enlightenment that we're going to be talking about. So let's look right here. Okay, for example, we're going to be talking about Rousseau right here. Rousseau in France. Surprise! It sounds French. This Gaspar can't speak a lick of French, but if you think about something like Gaston from Disney or something, it helps. It helps. Okay, we're going to be talking about that. Voltaire, Montesquieu, Derrida. Okay, all kinds of very French-sounding people. We're not going to talk about Kant. We can't talk about Kant. Oh, okay. And some of these monarchs we're going to talk a little bit about. But again, here's Europe, and this would be the different kind of places in which the Enlightenment is happening. Okay. Here's a timeline that's a little bit better than some of the other ones that I presented, okay? It looks at Europe's intellectual revolution, okay? If you notice, these first couple of things here, Copernican hypothesis, published in 1543, a lot of these first ones are scientific things. Again, kind of going back to the scientific revolution that we talked about 2 weeks ago, I think. And so basically the Enlightenment is going to kind of again, build off of the ideas that were happening in the scientific revolution, and they're going to apply it to things like government and politics and society. Okay, so we've got some of these famous ones here. We're going to be talking about Hobbes' Leviathan, and Locke's two treatises of government, Montesquieu's Spirit of Laws. These are all things that are going to appear on your quiz, and you'll notice again, it's roughly 1600s and 1700s that most of this stuff is going on. So there's some little background and context for you. Okay, let's talk about factors that led to the Enlightenment. Why is this happening? Why is this new philosophy appearing? Okay, and again, as we mentioned, we saw with the timeline, this movement, sometimes called the Age of Enlightenment, happens in the 1600s and 1700s, in Europe, okay? Enlightenment thinkers question traditional ideas about government, okay? So, up until this point in time, throughout most of history, most government structures and states are run by some kind of a king or monarch or something like that, or maybe an emperor. And these sorts of ideas are after the scientific revolution starts to question the universe and our place in it, and after the Reformation starts questioning Christianity, well, then people also start to question, what about society? Are we getting things right in society? What sorts of things could we do differently with society? And that's what the Enlightenment is about, okay? So again, as I've mentioned, it's really, the Enlightenment is focusing on society, government, politics, okay? It's a lot of focus on rights and responsibilities, okay? So in a time of absolute monarchy, which we talked about, which kings have total power, the Enlightenment is starting to suggest, well, wait, maybe people should have some kind of say. Maybe there are some protections that people should have so that the king can't just chop your head off because he has an upset tummy or something like that. But there's, so maybe rights for citizens and people in a country, but also sort of responsibilities, things that they're supposed to do as well. Okay, again, the Enlightenment is talking about politics, applying reason to politics, and reason becomes a major focus of the Enlightenment, applying scientific principles maybe to like government and society. Okay? Enlightenment thinkers reject this concept of absolutism, right? Again, absolute monarchy is something in which a king has like total power, okay? And they can do whatever they want, whenever they want. And Enlightenment thinkers and applying reason begin to question this, okay? But do we need this sort of thing? You need to have a king who can say, all right, everybody, you're going to stand on one leg or I'm going to throw you in the dungeon. And they say no, maybe that we could change these sorts of things, okay? And again, sort of suggesting that maybe that people should have some rights as well, limitations on the powers that kings had, like Louis the Sun King that we mentioned, for example. So an important philosophical idea during the Enlightenment was that ordinary people should be able to pursue greater opportunities, okay? Again, like, in questioning if the king should have total power. Much as during the Reformation, they questioned, should the Pope have total power, right? Do we even need a Pope? Maybe we can have a Christianity that doesn't have a Pope. They begin to suggest that maybe, regular people, average people should have some kind of a say in government. This is a new advancement, relatively new. You had some experiments in ancient Greece with democracy, and this starts to come up again in the Enlightenment. If you remember back to the Renaissance, you'll recall that Europeans are actually looking at ancient Greek texts and ancient Roman texts, and so maybe that's where some of these ideas start to get traction, as they're looking back at what the Greeks did and say, we should try that too. Okay, so that ordinary people should be able to pursue greater opportunities. We should also say that this has something to do with something called capitalism that we've talked about. And this is a good part about capitalism. Capitalism, as you have these merchants starting to develop power and amassing great wealth, they start to question, wait a second, how come these nobles are super rich? They don't do anything. I'm at least selling stuff, okay? I should have more of a say. Me as a capitalist who's got all this money and who's doing all these things and bringing all this wealth into the economy, I should have a greater say in society. And so that's a positive thing. That's a positive thing that happens because of capitalism and Enlightenment. Let's look at this picture right here. This dude is up here. He looks like he's about to make a paper airplane, right? And he's like, dudes, check it out, I'm gonna toss this. And, maybe this guy right here, he's scratching his chest. Maybe he has smallpox. I hope not. This is what we need to bring this fashion thing back. Like if my stomach is itching me, I should be able to insert my hand and just scratch. This is a normal thing. That was part of the Enlightenment. So he's actually probably just talking and explaining things. Lots of talking during the Enlightenment. Lots of explaining things. Just like Mr. Gaspar. People just didn't shut up. That's what the Enlightenment was all about. Okay, what are some more factors that led to the Enlightenment, okay? Oh, here we got a guy. He's ordering some pizzas. Hey, if you want pineapple on your pizza, raise your hand. And this guy's like, man, Frank, shut up with the pineapple already. Okay, and again, you have another discussion. People are talking. You did that a lot during the Enlightenment. Discussing ideas. Okay, so the Enlightenment came after the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, and the Reformation. Again, this is another Edgenuity quiz question. It'll ask you about chronology. It'll say, which came first? And so that's what you have to do here. The Middle Ages, with knights and kings and stuff like that. And then, sometimes referred to as the Dark Ages. Then we had the Renaissance, which we talked about, the rebirth of Europe. During the Middle Ages, if you recall, Europe is very backwards. It's like the laggards of society, okay? That starts to change during the Renaissance. Then you have the Reformation, okay? With people like Martin Luther who are questioning the power of the Catholic Church, okay? And you can see then how that'll lead to the Enlightenment. Again, I kind of mentioned it earlier. People are questioning, do we need a pope? Okay, is this the best way to do things? Do we need kings? How much power should kings have? Okay, so all of this stuff is kind of dovetailing and influencing it and getting people to begin to reconsider how society should be oriented and what society should look like. Okay, in the Enlightenment. Isn't this enlightening? Bringing light to the Dark Ages, as it were. So the Reformation, the events of the Reformation, affected the Enlightenment because people challenged religious institutions during the Reformation, right? We talked about that, right? Should the Pope have all this power? Should he have the giant hat? Yes, keep the giant hat. I like the giant hat. And that led them to challenge government authority during the Enlightenment. Okay, again, they're questioning whether the Pope should have this much power, and then that leads them to naturally sort of question how much power should governments have? What should they be able to do to people? Okay? All right. You see this in the English Civil War, which I think that was last week, talked about the English Civil War, okay, in which, in fact, they executed the king during the English Civil War, okay, and then they have this guy, Oliver Cromwell, who takes over for a little bit, and they have England essentially run without a king for a little bit, okay? The English Civil War affected the Enlightenment because the English Civil War caused many people to question the role of government, which sparked the imagination of Enlightenment thinkers. So they look at England and they say, look, these guys can function without a king. Well, maybe we could do that too. Or we could have a king that doesn't have as many powers. It got people to think, okay? And eventually start to change things. And as we talked about earlier, have maybe structures that give ordinary people more say in things like government and society. Okay, let's look at some of the ideas and philosophies of Enlightenment thinkers. So let's get specific here. What do these guys think, and who are these people? Okay? One of the first ones that you're going to get on the quiz, and which was talked about in Edgenuity, is this guy, Thomas Hobbes, and he writes this book called The Leviathan, a big monster. It's kind of about that. Not exactly. Not like Godzilla per se. It's a 1651 publication about creating moral obligations to live in a civil society. Well, that's not wrong, but I wouldn't characterize it like that. That's what you're going to see on the quiz. Basically, though, Hobbes writes this book called Leviathan, in which he basically argues that you need a very strong state. You need to have a powerful king who's almost like a Leviathan, a monster, right? To have power to keep people in line, okay? He says you need to have this, all right? His idea is, he says that, look, people are naturally selfish and violent, okay? That's just the way they are. And in fact, he says, if you were to get rid of government, basically society would be like one big YNW Melly song, right? I've got murder on my mind. People killing each other for no reason, stealing iPhones. So he says that in order to stop that, people come together and they agree to sort of give up some of their rights, and that in exchange you have this social contract in which you have a king then that steps in to keep order. And he says you need that. You need to have that powerful king to smash people down. And that's why you see this guy right here. Okay, big, oh, that'll clip. Oh, okay, big monster dude up here, powerful king, again, representing like the power that the state has to have to keep people in line, okay? By the way, Thomas Hobbes, he's actually wrong about what he imagines early, prior to civilization being like, okay? If you go back and you look at the Paleolithic age, it's actually surprising. People cooperated with each other, okay? There was no inequality to speak of because it was impossible. What's shocking is that it really was not a war of all against all. That's not to say that conflicts didn't happen, but the anthropological record that we have is that really it's cooperation that saved us as a species. It's really helping each other out that allowed us to survive for most of our existence as a species, okay? And that things were cooperatively done, collectively shared, and collectively owned. That's actually the record. And it actually wasn't until civilizations take off that things start to get nasty. You don't actually have things like slavery, for example, until you have the advent of civilizations. So I think the thing that Thomas Hobbes gets wrong is he looks at society back then, which correctly was nasty, and people were selfish and violent, but that's more of a reflection of how society was at that point in time. Look, if you have a nasty society, don't be surprised if people are nasty. If you have a dog-eat-dog society, don't get surprised if you get bit, okay? So that's kind of the mistake that Hobbes makes when he formulates this theory called the Leviathan. It's still understandable, right? I get where he's coming from here. So he creates this concept of the social contract, which I kind of mentioned, okay? And the social contract is the idea that people living in this natural state who can just do whatever they want. Like, if I want to stab you with a big pointy stick, yeah, I can do that, right? I have that total freedom. But that also means that somebody can stab me. Please don't stab me. And that kind of sucks. That's not a good environment in which to live. So Thomas Hobbes says that that's why you create societies, that you have then the Leviathan, the state step in. A state is created that has the power to regulate things so that you can't just go around, again, like, YNW Melly and busted caps and people, okay? John Locke expands this idea, and that's what we're going to talk about now, okay? He doesn't agree with Thomas Hobbes 100%, okay? And basically, the social contract theory states that citizens give up some liberties, freedoms, to government in exchange for protection of their self-interest. Okay, in other words, like, again, I'm going to give up my ability to just take what I want, kill who I want, so that I don't get robbed and shot and killed, okay? And also that governments are somewhat voluntarily created, right? That people agree to do this thing, okay? That's the social contract. And Hobbes kind of first articulates this. John Locke expands on it. Okay, John Locke, by the way, he differs from Thomas Hobbes, whereas Thomas Hobbes says, like, people are naturally selfish and violent. John Locke believes that people are naturally reasonable. Maybe if they're given reasonable stuff, but yeah, we also have flat earthers today and people that think that vaccines have nanotechnology in them. So maybe the Enlightenment is still a work in progress. We'll say that. We'll check back on the Enlightenment later. Okay. There he is, by the way. That's John Locke. You know what, kids? I'm looking here. John Locke looks like he is some kind of like Birdman superhero. Let's do a little drawing here. Let's see. I think if we were to do a little beak right there, a little beak right there, and then like a cape or something, that's pretty, yeah, I could see that. He could like fight in crime and stuff. There you go, John Locke. Anyway, what does John Locke have to say? He says, the end of law is not to abolish or restrain. In other words, we don't necessarily make laws just to hold people back, right? But to preserve and enlarge freedom. In other words, we need to have some laws so that you can be safe to do the things that you want, okay? For in all the states of created beings capable of laws, where there is no law, there is no freedom. Again, we've kind of talked about that. Like, there's just, chaos and you can do what you want. People are going to stab each other and kill each other. Nobody's going to be happy. Again, the historic record, the anthropological record suggests it's a little bit more complicated than that people actually cooperatively regulated each other, that we were able to survive as species without societies for a long period of time. So again, I'm not saying he's 100% wrong, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. So John Locke's second treatise of government is where he says that. And in Ingenuity, that's what you're going to see. You're going to see this little quote right here. And basically you have to identify what it says. And the quote supports Locke's belief in the social contract between people and government. That social contract, we're going to give up some of our rights for protection, okay? All right, what else do we got? Okay, a difference between the ideas of Hobbes and Locke was that Hobbes believed life without government was difficult, while Locke believed people have the right to rebel. I think they both kind of thought life without government would be difficult. I'm not sure about that, but that's definitely a difference, is that Locke believed, look, if they both believed in strong monarchs. They both believed you kind of need that, right? But Locke went as far as to say, like, look, if the king messes up, you have a right to kind of put him in place or even depose him. And that's something that Hobbes would definitely not have agreed with, okay? Deal with it is what he would have said. Suck it up, buttercup. Okay. Now let's talk about this guy, Baron de Montesquieu. It sounds like one of the Three Musketeers. It's a tasty candy, by the way. He was another one of these Enlightenment philosophers, very interested in government. Boring stuff. I'm sure he was an exciting guy. Enlightenment philosopher based out of France, Montesquieu, France. Who would imagine? Let me put my surprise face on. I thought he was German. So he's based out of France. And his big thing, he did lots of stuff, okay, but his big key idea was this idea of checks and balances. You may have heard about that in like a, 8th grade civics class or something. And basically he said, like, okay, you could have a king that has total power, but that could be bad, especially if he's a jerk and gets off on killing people. You don't want to have somebody that has that much power. So he says, instead, look, let's have a government where you have different parts. Well, that's actually separation of powers. Okay, so you'd have like maybe one part of government that makes the laws and another part that executes them. But here's where the checks and balances comes in. Each part of government can do something to check the other part, to stop the other part. He thinks of government as a big game of like rock, paper, scissors. So rather than have a king that has total power, You have maybe a king that has some power, but then like a legislature, a lawmaking body that has power to stop that king if he goes too far. Our own government has checks and balances, okay? So Congress makes the laws, okay? But for example, the president has the power to veto, to stop the laws, okay? But likewise, Congress has the power to impeach the president, right? So they all have some powers, different powers to stop each other. That way, nothing bad can ever happen. Okay. Yeah, checks and balances. There we go. Here we go. Oh, Rousseau. I don't know why. Rousseau kind of looks like a frat guy to me. He just gives off that vibe. Like, I can see him very much interested in, like, playing beer pong or something like that. That's what he looks like to me right there. So, Rousseau. French, obviously. Okay, he believes that governments create unequal societies. And what is this book? Discourse on Inequality or something like that, okay? Well, actually, no, this isn't, I don't think he says it's government. I think what he says is that it's actually private property that creates inequality, unequal societies. In other words, like he says, you know, basically people before you had governments and societies were doing their own thing, kind of like what Hobbes was saying. It's a little crazy and chaotic. But equal, okay? And he says, basically, the first time you have somebody who puts down a stake and says, this little piece of farm is mine, okay? The minute that you have that, you then have rich and poor, right? You then have that potential for things like slavery and things like that, okay? And because that guy with the little plot of land is maybe going to get more than others, and then still more, and you can have somebody who's very, very wealthy, and then people that are very, very poor. Now, I think what he says, though, is that, you know, government certainly helped to sustain that, right? He's saying that having poverty and inequality, it's kind of a choice, right? Governments are protecting private property. Many of these guys were okay with this idea, by the way. Okay, but on the Edgenuity quiz, this is what you're going to see. Believe that governments create unequal societies. I could be, I might have been asleep during my political science class when this was being talked about. I was probably staying up late playing Fortnite and getting lots of dubs. That's a lie. Mr. Gasper, you would crush Mr. Gasper in Fortnite. Like, it would, I should stream just so people could see, like, how terrible I am at this stuff. But at any rate, I could be wrong, but that's my recollection. It was private property that creates unequal societies. Okay, so then this other guy, Voltaire, guess where he's from? Yes, France. Again, lots of these French guys, okay? Voltaire. He believes that government should be separate from religion. And there's probably some good reason to think that, okay? You have the French government, for example, overwhelmingly Catholic, passing a number of laws to crush Protestants, to sort of force people to follow the Catholic religion. In fact, in some cases, like burning people alive for being heretics or questioning the church. So Voltaire says, you know what, that's probably a bad thing. Good on you, Voltaire. Also, he's a famous satirist. He was super funny back in the day. You guys would just fall asleep instantly reading one sentence from him, okay? But again, government should be separate from religion. Okay. Rousseau differs from Voltaire in that Rousseau argued against inequality among the classes, okay, right? He talked about, again, that, you know, you've got rich and poor that's sort of sustained by government, started by property. He says, this is a bad thing. Voltaire, on the other hand, he's more concerned about freedom of speech and freedom of religion, okay? That's what he's all about. Okay. You're going to get a question on Edgenuity, potentially, which is going to ask you now, okay, what came first in the Enlightenment? So let's look at chronology. I showed you a timeline a little bit, but here's a quiz question that's going to ask you to do just that. So Enlightenment events include the English Civil War comes to an end, and again, we talked about how that, like, influences people. Maybe we should try something like that. Locke builds on the ideas of Hobbes shortly after that. Montesquieu in France, he publishes The Spirit of Laws, talking about checks and balances again. And then Rousseau publishes The Social Contract, talking about the social contract. And that's going to be the last option that you see. This is what you're going to see on the Edgenuity quiz. Okay. What do we got here? Oh, it's George Washington making the Constitution. And look, he's forgotten where he's parked his car. And he's thinking during his speech, man, did I park in a handicap zone? And this guy's like, no, you parked in the F lot, George. Okay, so anyway, following the Enlightenment, many Europeans began to believe people can improve their government. They want to apply reasoning to the government, sort of that scientific reasoning that we talked about. Can we improve things? Can we make things better? Do we have to have absolute monarchies and things like that? We talked about this before. In the 1700s, an effect of the Enlightenment was a rise in support for representative government, okay? So again, instead of having an absolute monarchy, a king that has total power, they think, wouldn't it be great if people could maybe vote for people that vote to make the law so that people have a say in government and how society operates. And there's an increase for that in the 1700s, like in the United States, for example, and in England as well. So that's a good thing. In France, philosophers, people that like to think deep thoughts about their unemployment, they discussed Enlightenment ideas in things called salons. Not where you would get your wonderful hair done, like Mr. Gasper's flowing locks. Salons would be like sort of places where people would get together to discuss things in a house, okay? Or in a mansion, let's be honest. That's where this stuff was going on, okay? I'll show you a picture in a second. A political effect of the Enlightenment was that some monarchs embraced new ideas from the movement. So by the way, in other words, some kings and queens actually looked at this Enlightenment stuff and said, you know, I don't know if I agree with everything. I think you should keep me as a king. But they did try and pass a more reasonable and just form of government. These kings did try to come up with laws that were more, progressive, like up-to-date, more rational. And let's be honest, that's kind of a low bar, right? I mean, so, back in the Middle Ages, if you killed a deer on the king's property, they would execute you. So maybe instead they'd be like, wait a minute, what about if we don't execute them, but instead we just beat them into a coma? So there's progress right there, okay? And some of these Enlightenment monarchs, Enlightenment kings like Catherine the Great, Frederick the Great, lots of greats, okay, in Prussia, start to try and actually do some of these Enlightenment reforms. There you go. Okay. Many Enlightenment ideas were incorporated into the founding documents of the United States. We talked about that a little bit, right? Checks and balances, you see that in our Constitution, okay? These ideas of rights, okay? Rousseau and Locke, Jefferson, Declaration of Independence, where he talks about liberty in the pursuit of happiness. He literally stole that from Locke, who said liberty in the pursuit of property, okay? So yeah, they definitely incorporated these ideas into the founding documents of the United States, and you see Enlightenment stuff today in our own government. Okay, and here's a salon right there, okay? And again, it looks like a convention for retired pimps, but no, these are just a bunch of philosophers and stuff talking and debating various things at the time, and that's how these Enlightenment ideas spread and got popularity and gained traction. And that's it. That's everything about the Enlightenment. If you have any questions, you can send them to bgaspai@tacoma.k12.wa.us. Hope you enjoyed the presentation, and we will see you next time.